Alleluia. Om Mani Padme. Om. Allah.
Welcome. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Dr. Rachel Carling-Jenkins. She's pro-life and social justice advocate. Thanks for coming back again, Rachel. Now, something that we did mention last week, and which is part of a fairly significant thing that you were involved in, was the Infant Viability Bill. Can you give us just a bit of an idea of what the objective of that bill was and the pathway that it's taken through and the aftermath?
Sure. So the Infant Viability Bill was focused on a couple of key aspects. One was supporting women through pregnancy. I don't believe here in Victoria we do that very well. I think that we offer abortion too quickly without solving some of the issues behind why a woman might be seeking it or why her partner might be pressuring her into it.
Yes.
So it's so much easier, for example, to offer a homeless woman an abortion rather than to facilitate housing for her.
Yes.
So to me it's kind of an obvious issue. It's not the pregnancy that's the issue, it's the circumstances surrounding the woman that are. So my bill was focused on exploring those circumstances, ensuring that medical professionals were in touch with that, and that welfare organisations would also be in touch with that element. And that arose out of conversations with pregnancy support services who spoke to me often about we get some early term referrals, we don't get much in the middle, nothing in the late, and yet we then see children once they're born, with midwives ringing up and saying, we've got a baby who's just been born and the parents have nothing. So there's a real gap in our pregnancy support for women. So that was part of the bill, and the other part of the bill was to roll back the most extreme elements of our abortion law, where we have abortion in Victoria up to birth.
Yes.
So I sought to roll that back in line with international standard back to 24 weeks, which in Victoria is what is known as the age of viability.
Yes, yes. And the question of the age of viability, of course, is a nonsense in any event because it's a human set standard and let's not go there.
And it's very fluid. I understand that. Unfortunately, legislation is very black and white. So a point had to be fixed.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Which was very difficult and fraught, as you can imagine.
So there's a lot of social justice thrust there with the women and supporting women in that very vulnerable time.
Absolutely. The pro-life movement in Victoria has often looked at the baby only and not at the broader picture. So I do seek to look at the broader picture. What's happening for women, what's happening for mothers. And broader than that, although this wasn't in the legislation, just a slight tangent, is what's happening for fathers, what's happening for grandparents, what's happening in our communities.
It's a broader, much broader social issue.
Absolutely.
Now, when it came to the vote, what happened?
Well, it didn't go down very well. So I was given a very short time frame to debate it during non-government business time, which restricted a lot of debate. And when it came down to it, the vote was 11 people voted for the bill out of 40. So quite overwhelmingly lost, with only 25% of the chamber. And it was a conscience vote, supposedly, on both sides. And I had equal numbers of Liberal Party and ALP, for example, voting for the bill.
Okay.
Which was very interesting.
That is interesting.
A lot more crossbench support and support from the National Party as well.
Now, there were two things with this. First is you actually did some research in the United States in relation, before you drew this bill up. What did you discover there, which...
Yeah, I looked at the various pieces of legislation that they've been bringing in and what was most successful. And going after the late-term abortion was the most successful for them. At the time I went over, about 43 out of 50 states had restrictions on late-term abortion.
Right.
So there was abortion with restrictions often, unlike here, up to the 5-6 month mark, and then none after that.
Yeah.
So that seemed to be the space where there were the best, strongest arguments, not just for the pro-life community, but for the broader community. When I brought that then back to Australia, there were articles in the paper. For example, one feminist writer had an article in the Herald Sun that claimed, I'm pro-choice but against late-term abortion. So it started to capture a broader population than the normal, I guess, people you'd expect to accept pro-life legislation. We also did polling as part of that research, and we found that Victoria is actually the lowest in the polling here. Across Australia, about 90% of people are against late-term abortion. In Victoria, it was less than that. It was about 75% of the population, depending on whether you were polling a city area or a country area. So it was between 70 and 80% of our population are against this late-term abortion. Unfortunately, that wasn't reflected within Parliament.
Unfortunate. It's one word you could use. There are others.
There are a lot of others.
Yes, yes. And so, but for yourself personally, what were the... I've read some articles from people who were fairly astringent in their criticism. How did you go?
Well, if I'm being really honest, it was quite discouraging straight after the vote. It was strange. There was a discouragement where, you know, I was reminded that we're not called to be successful but to be faithful. So I thought, okay, I need to keep going. But there was also an encouraging element around the amount of support that we had built. It was almost like we hadn't reached the peak with this bill, that the support was still, the groundswell was still building.
Yes.
So I do think that this groundswell will continue and will play a major role in the next election.
Yes, it's sort of, there's a bit of a tail end coming in because there's some fairly serious implications which perhaps, as you say, it hasn't really settled properly.
I don't think so, that's right.
Now, I'm not going to ask you this question, but I'll ask you after the break because we're sort of out of time. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity. We're speaking with Dr. Rachel Carling-Jenkins. Now, we went to America, and you did a lot of research for that act. That was good, and because you have to do that, of course. But you've gone back to America again. What did you do this time?
Well, this time I went again to look at the pro-life movement, but also broader than that, I looked at sanctity of life issues more broadly because we have the assisted suicide legislation coming in.
Okay.
And I also looked at legislation impacting families more broadly as well, because I think families in Victoria are really struggling, particularly under this current government, for basic respect.
Yes.
And so I started to explore those issues in the US as well.
And so what did that look like? In sort of in a nutshell, when you stand in America, as many people do, you're standing in America and you've got these things happening around you. I think you mentioned something about 10.5 years, a decade and a half or something.
Yes.
Difference?
It does feel, and from conversations with people there, it does feel that our movement around life and around families is probably about 10, 15 years behind where the US was. So they were where we were at, but they've moved so much further now. So that was actually encouraging in a lot of ways to see, well, in my lifetime and in my career lifetime, working life, that I could well see some of these changes that I'm seeking.
And what sort of conduit is there? Like there was you went there to do research. Are there a lot of people doing that? Do we have universities doing it? Is there a groundswell of intellectual investigation in relation to this important part of our legislation and our laws?
I don't think there's a lot of that yet, not from Australia. They certainly have built that particular part up in the last 10 years in the US, which I was very impressed that, that might be where we're going. At the moment, it's still very hard for academics here to openly do that kind of research. And I think our movement is going through a change at the moment, particularly when I talk about our pro-life movement. It has been a very traditional, focused on babies, less so on the feminist issues as a whole. And it's been led by an older generation.
Yeah.
And I think now we're starting to get more people my age as well involved. So I'm kind of the apathetic generation here in Australia, people in their 40s that are still raising families and kind of being distracted, but starting to become increasingly aware that these policies are impacting directly on their lives and directly on their families.
Yeah.
And so they're becoming more politically aware. And certainly, as we go down in age groups, people in their 30s, people in their 20s are starting to look for something more.
Yeah.
And that's what we are seeking to do here in Victoria now as well.
Yeah. You were also present at the March for Life, was it, in the US? What was that like?
Oh, it was absolutely amazing. Mike Pence came, so first Vice President to ever attend a march. And he's very open about the pro-life movement having a huge impact on getting him elected and getting the Trump-Pence administration elected.
Okay, right.
And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing the defund Planned Parenthood and the legislation around restricting funding for local abortions, etc., coming out of the states at the moment. Because they feel as though they owe the people that elected them. And all politicians do. They feel as though they owe their constituents. So Mike Pence is coming out as a strong leader in this area. It was also just very inspiring to be there in a crowd of hundreds of thousands. It was more than 500,000 people attended, and there were people from colleges, so they'd hold their college banners. Schools came, so people would be in uniform. Various orders came. So there was this whole sense of collectivity around an issue. There were also the very openly atheist feminists who were coming with a pro-life perspective, which is a lot bigger in the US than it is here. It's starting here, but again, very beginning. They were also there as part of the larger march and quite accepted. So there was just this sea of diversity, and where they were all there for a common cause, for the common good, which was amazing to see. It was so big that not everyone could fit into the rally ground. So there was an impromptu, well, let's just start marching. And they started marching early towards the Supreme Court.
Now, there was also some interjection and some violence in the crowd as well, wasn't there?
There was none that I observed. So I think, to be honest, the media here kind of play up those kinds of issues.
Oh, no.
Yes, absolutely. Is that a surprise? More than what really happened. So I was there pretty much on my own, and I didn't feel that there was as much opposition, particularly in proportion to what we have when we run our marches in Melbourne.
Yes. Well, there have been some nasty incidents in Melbourne, haven't there?
There have been a lot more significant incidents here. I mean, you'll get, the occasional person in the US maybe, having a bit of an interjection, but nothing that I thought was significant.
Well, there was the marches here.
Yes.
We've had people fairly aggressively responding to the crowd. Were you at that one?
We have, yes. Yes, so there was that march in 2013 where Bernie Finn, who led the march, was struck, physically struck, and the keynote speaker of that one was actually pulled to the ground, I believe, and, injured. And And I understand this. A lot of people are scared to come back because of that. The police were quite ineffective that day. They've been reviewed now, and obviously that their procedures are a lot better, and that hasn't happened since.
No.
But we will still always get some dissent.
Which dissent's fine, provided you express it appropriately.
That is very true.
And so you were also at the inauguration as well, weren't you?
I was. It was quite a privilege. I had a friend in the US who ended up with a spare ticket. So I said, yes, that'd be great. And again, you know, I was in DC that day from 7 a.m. because you had to line up early for all their security until about 2:30 in the afternoon. I didn't see one person doing an anti-Trump protest.
Oh, really?
Not one. So, and I know a lot of people here were very worried about me. They were like, oh, there's so many protests.
But I'll tell you what I'm worried about. I'm worried about time.
Time's running out.
We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity. We're speaking with Dr. Rachel Carling-Jenkins. And we're talking, in the past, it's all around this infant viability bill and your exploration of that and your pro-life stance. After the bill had failed, and there would have been a groundswell, I guess. What did that look like? What was the wave like?
There was. It was like it was gaining momentum here in Victoria. That all of a sudden, this was the first piece of pro-life legislation we've ever seen here in the state. So there was a general excitement. There was also a lot of consciousness raising that had gone into developing this bill and developing the momentum. So then people got excited and they didn't want to stop with the legislation. They wanted to keep going. They wanted to influence legislation. They got excited that they thought they have a possibility that they could do that.
They could do it, yeah.
And one of the issues they identified was we simply don't have the numbers in Parliament, particularly in our upper house. So there was this focus around politics, not just, talking in churches, and which is all very valuable, of course, but it was a more focused approach. We wanted to talk to politicians, and we want to influence politicians and motivate people to get into politics as well.
Yes, which once again is that's the essence of democracy, isn't it?
It is,
and that's what we tend to forget sometimes.
It is, absolutely.
Yes. So okay, we've got that groundswell, etc. And the interesting observation you made about America is that the movement there has a much younger profile.
Definitely. That was particularly highlighted at the march. There were, most of the crowd were younger than me. And I don't consider myself too old, although I do dye my hair, I will confess. So most were younger than, I'm 41, so most were younger than me. And I thought that was really exciting. I saw masses of, people my son's age out. And whereas when we have our marches, most people are older than me.
Yes.
So there's been a huge shift in America where they actually describe this generation that's coming up as their pro-life generation, which is very exciting. And hopefully we will see that here in 10 to 15 years as well.
Difficult sociological question, but any clue as to why they might be rising like that and becoming more aware and present? Is there any idea what that might be?
A lot of people in the US thought it was around the imaging, that technology's changed, and so their young people are recognising life in a different way compared to their parents. Although we have the same imaging here, and yet we're not quite getting that same message across.
No.
So I think that overall, perhaps it's the imaging, perhaps it's also the political climate there is ripe for them.
Yes.
They are seeing laws changed. Over the last 10 years, they have seen rollbacks in legislation. They also have a lot of people standing up and telling their story. So doctors who used to perform abortions are coming out and saying why they've stopped doing that. Nurses have come out to witness to what they've seen. Women are standing up telling their stories. So I think all of that combined is motivating this new generation to go, we can be part of the change, It's an exciting change, and we will be part of the change.
And there's, you mentioned the whistleblowers, that there were tended to be more whistleblowers in that regard.
Absolutely. So here in Victoria, I found it quite difficult to get people, and I understand why, to publicly tell their stories. So I would have people, medical researchers and doctors and nurses tell their stories of trauma to me privately, but they didn't feel that they could yet publicly declare that. Obviously, they're going to lose their jobs if they do. And we don't have a movement that could support them either emotionally or financially at the moment. Whereas in the States, it's gotten to the point where their movement is so large that they can support people in a very real way to come out and make those statements when needed. So we're on that path, but we're, as I've said, 10 to 15 years behind.
Yes, but there's some comforting common ground, and that's the fact that we're both, all of us, Americans and Australians, are human beings, and the drivers to this are deeply embedded in that reality.
That's very true.
So it's likely to arise. Now, there's a new movement which has arisen in Australia called Move for Change.
That's right.
Tell us about that.
So Move to Change arose out of that groundswell around my bill, where there was a group of people who said, no, we want to keep going with this. I can't bring up another piece of legislation like this within my term, so the same MP can't bring that up, so I need to wait until I'm re-elected or until someone else can do that. So this group is really focused initially on Victoria and on the 2018 election to get better pro-life candidates across parties. So they're working apolitically, which is why we're really clear it's evolved away from me. Which is very exciting. It's a young crowd. It's headed by someone in their 40s. Most of the people on the board are in their 30s. So it's much younger. They launched recently at a gala dinner with a jazz band, and it was very upmarket, and they were going for, the professional look, and also to put that kind of glamour they were describing. So there was a lot of glamour in the room. And that's not something that people normally would think that our pro-life movement is. No. They don't think of it as glamorous or professional. But Move to Change are determined to bring that element. And there were a lot of tickets sold to people in their 20s. It was a very young crowd. There were a lot of comments around that.
Oh, that's quite exciting, and of course they have a plan of action. Yes. But I think the apolitical nature of it is the exciting part.
Most definitely. So a lot of the people on the committee aren't actually committed to a political party in particular. So that gives them the ability to move across all parties and to start influencing pre-selections, start influencing people putting their names up as candidates, and talk to them on that level about the single issues.
That's amazing. And what are the two key issues, or there's three key issues there?
Yep.
Compounding.
So they want to elect pro-life politicians. They want to educate the general population about why they should be voting for pro-life politicians, so about our legislation. And they want to get a grassroots movement going around this.
Movement. Now, we're out of time, so I want to thank you really very much for this insight that you've given us, because you are a pro-life person, you're a politician, you can change things, and I believe you will. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Noel.
You've been watching Harmony and Diversity. We'll be back next week. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.
Baha'u'llah, Shanti Om, Allahu